Clockwork, or All Wound Up, by Phillip Pullman. But when he opened the door of the inn to collect the little knight and hide him in his lodgings, he felt a shiver of fear. He stood on the threshold, afraid and unwilling to enter, and once again he took no notice of Pussy the cat, who jumped down from the window-sill when he saw the door open. There's no need to be superstitious about cats, but they are our fellow creatures and we shouldn't ignore them. It would have been polite of Carl to offer his knuckles for the old cat to rub his head against, but Carl was wound up too tightly for politeness, so he didn't see the cat stalking in past his legs. Trouble will come of this, you mark my words. It always pays to be polite, even to dumb creatures. Finally Carl gathered his courage and went in. How still the room was, and how sinister that little figure under the canvas, and that sword point. How wickedly sharp, sharp enough to have pierced the canvas already and be glinting in the lamplight. Some coals settled in the stove, sending a little flare of red out on the floor and making Carl jump nervously. The glow made him think of the fires of hell, and he sweated and mopped his brow. Then the long case clock in the corner began to whir and wheeze, preparing to strike. Carl leapt as if he'd been discovered in the act of murder, and then leant weakly against the table, his heart beating like thunder. "Oh, I can't bear this," he said. "I've done nothing wrong, have I? Then why am I so nervous? What is there to be frightened of?" Hearing his words, old Pussy decided that here was someone who might give him a little milk, if he asked nicely. So the cat jumped up on the table beside him and rubbed himself on Carl's arm. Feeling this, Carl turned in shock to see a black cat who had appeared, as it seemed, out of nowhere. Naturally, this was too much for Carl. He leapt away from the table with an exclamation of horror. "Here it is. Here comes the trouble." "Oh, what the devil!" And then he clapped his hands to his mouth, as if trying to cram the word back inside, but it was too late. In the corner of the room the metal figure had begun to move. The canvas fell to the floor, and Sir Ironsoul raised his sword even higher, and turned his helmet this way and that, until he saw where Carl was cowering. "No, no! Stop! Wait! The tune! Let me whistle the tune!" But his lips were too dry. Frantic, he licked them with a dry tongue. No use. He couldn't produce a sound. Nearer and nearer came the little knight with a sharp sword, and Carl stumbled away, trying to hum, to sing, to whistle, and all he could do was cry and stammer and sob, and the knight came closer and closer. There's no way of avoiding this. I'd save the wretch if I could, but the story is wound up, and it must all come out. And I'm afraid Carl deserved a bad end. He was lazy and bad-tempered, but worse than that, he had a wicked heart. He really would have used Sir Ironsoul to kill people and make money in the way he'd thought about. So, close your eyes and think of something else for a moment. Carl is ticking his final tock. When Gretel got back to the inn, she heard Pussy meowing inside, and said as she opened the door, "How did you get in, you silly cat?" Pussy shot out into the square as Gretel came in and wouldn't stop to be petted. She shut the door and looked around for the prince, but she didn't see him anywhere. Instead, a horrid sight met her eyes and made her shiver and clutch her breast. There, in the middle of the room, stood Sir Ironsoul, with his helmet shining blankly and his sword slanting down. He was holding it like that because the point was in the throat of Carl the apprentice, who lay stark dead beside him.